I'm Jeff Cook, President and CEO of the United Methodist Insurance Company, and I'd like to welcome you to another webinar hosted by the United Methodist Insurance Program. We're a ministry of the United Methodist Church, and you can find us at www.uminsure.org. We're blessed today to be joined by our friends from GuideOne Insurance and the Sovereign Insurance Group. Thanks to Jeff Dramashauser of Sovereign for organizing all of this for us, and thanks to Brian Gleason from GuideOne for joining us today as our expert. A few housekeeping items before we start. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will collect them, and we'll go through them at the very end. Brian, Jeff, and I will be here to answer those questions. Also, we are recording this session, and everyone who registered will get a link to that recording. It'll be posted on the UMIP website, and you'll also get a copy of the slide presentation. Our topic today deals with frozen pipes, and it is a significant source of loss that is often overlooked in the property market compared to wind and hail, especially here in hurricane season. Unlike storms, though, there are a number of steps that you can take to prevent occurrences, prevent the likelihood of occurrences, and in some cases to mitigate the damage from them. And remember, the cheapest claims are the ones that never happen. So Brian is here today to tell us how to do that. And he is a risk management and loss control consultant with GuideOne. He has spent most of the last 30 years working with schools, churches, and nonprofits as an employee, a consultant, and a board member. He has spent 20 years as a risk manager for a university. He is a certified school risk manager and writes and speaks frequently on the topic of risk management. So, Brian, enough of me. It's all yours.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I'm glad to be with you guys today. I'm going to go ahead and share presentation here. Go. Yeah, I'm glad to be with you. Like we said, our goal from GuideOne is really to try and make your life simpler. We really believe that, we understand that insurance is a complicated process and, in a lot of ways, kind of a distraction from your overall mission. So our goal is to provide you tools and strategies to reduce that risk and take some of that burden off of you. We'll kind of walk through some things today. One of those worst nightmares is coming into the church and finding it flooded, quite often from frozen pipes. So we'll talk through that a little bit today, things you can do to keep that from happening. Because it's not a pleasant thing. Unfortunately, we see it far too often, particularly as the weather gets colder. Talk a little bit about what's been happening the last few years. At GuideOne, we've paid out a number of claims. Those totals you see on your screen are not GuideOne's totals. Those are the industry totals for a couple of large freezing events over the last couple of years, from 2021, 2022. But it has impacted churches, part of that. And not just the places we traditionally think of in the Northeast or the upper Midwest. It's kind of hit everywhere in the country. In fact, we've had more claims in the South than we have in the Northeast. So kind of maybe a little counterintuitive until you stop and think about the fact that buildings in the North and Northeast are built to survive extreme cold weather. And building codes there are designed around that. Building codes, along the South and Southeast are not necessarily designed for that. So we see a lot more issues there, compounded by several other factors. For example, in Texas, we had some issues with utility companies that were shutting out power and things like that exacerbated the situation. But you can kind of get a picture from this map of where we've seen the bulk of the claims over the last number of years. You can see, 4 of the top 5 states are in the South and Southeast. So it's not all in the traditional places that you might expect it. But as Jeff was saying, there are some things we can do to minimize the risk. So we'll walk through some things there. Ultimately, we'd rather it not happen to you. But over those 2 years, 2021, 2022, GuideOne paid out about a little over $16 million in claims, more than 750 frozen pipe claims over those 2 years. Average claim of $110,000. And that number does not include the deductible that the church would pay. Talk a little bit about that in a minute. Got a couple of examples for you I can share. Things you don't want to see when you come into the church. This is a church in Oklahoma. It had a pipe burst in the ceiling, causing over $155,000 in damages. Flooded the entire building. This one is a relatively large church. Came in and found, the children's wing you see here was flooded. Put them out of commission for quite a while. And unfortunately, in the process of replacing it, we had to tear out a fair chunk of that murals that you see on the wall, because ultimately all the sheetrock that was in the flooded area had to be removed. So created some challenges here as well. This is a church in Texas. You can see it was a little bit farther through the remediation process in this photo from our claims folks. 16,000 square feet of building here. This one was over $800,000 worth of damages paid out. So, and you can see that, part of the process, all of the carpet had to come out. You can see that the wallpaper already peeling off the walls from the humidity. Brought in a damage restoration company, came in. They were in the process in this photo of getting humidity down using a series of fans, dehumidifiers, other techniques. But put them out of commission for a little while, this repaired. This is a church in Tennessee, and this isn't the church building itself, but the parsonage. And the contributing factor here is the building was vacant at the time. They were between pastors. Nobody was living in the parsonage. And nobody thought to check the building for 2 months. So in the meantime, the water just kept running. I think they finally checked it out when they got the water bill and realized that it had gone up considerably. Went out and checked the property. And you can see that there's a line on the wall there. That was all flooded up to that line. There were broken pipe under the sink in the kitchen. This is partway through the remediation. So they torn out the cabinets, got all the carpet out of the building. You can see it, extent of the damage here, but all in all, $26,000 worth of damages on a single family home. But the bigger issue is that, extensive repairs had to be made. And again, out of commission for a while. Largely because of the contributing factor that nobody checked on the building. So what could have been minimized with probably just new carpeting and maybe a little bit of touch up on the walls, if it had been discovered quickly, turned into a much larger claim because nobody checked on the building for a while. So the question is, how do we keep this from happening? We'll kind of walk through that today and talk about how you can develop a plan ahead of time. Sure, you got strategies to help prevent this. We'll get you some prevention strategies for as the winter weather sets in, when it looks like it's going to be cold, and then response procedures if you have an issue like this. So we'll kind of walk through that for you today. First step is always, planning ahead. We want to make sure that we develop a plan ahead of time, minimize that risk. We want to make sure we've identified a group of people who are responsible for the facility. And that's always one of the key points, is making sure that somebody's responsible to make sure that when this happens, it gets cleaned up, it's checked on, somebody's responsible for the maintenance. That usually ends up being a contributing factor. If we don't know, nobody's responsible for it. It's ultimately, somebody needs to be checking on the building. Somebody needs to be taking the steps necessary, whether it's a maintenance person, a property committee, trustees, somebody ultimately needs to take the responsibility for it. So one of the things we want to make sure is that those individuals know where the water shutoff is, like we were talking about. The quicker we shut that water off, the more we reduce the damage. So ultimately, the key to fixing this is getting the water out of there as quickly as possible. That means we need to stop the water flow. So everybody responsible should know where to shut off the water. We had a church in North Georgia that we paid out significantly And part of the contributing factor there was it took them almost 18 hours to get the water shut off because the freeze happened over a weekend and nobody knew where the water shut off was. So they actually ended up having to call the utility company out to shut it off at the meter. It's the only way they can get it shut off. That contributed to a much larger claim. One of the things we talk about is in order to reduce the risk of frozen pipes, we need to keep the temperature up above freezing in the building. Typically, we say closer to 50 degrees for minimum. 50 to 55 degrees will do a pretty good job of keeping the pipes from freezing. And I understand that there's a cost associated with that. But the reality is, in most circumstances, you're going to pay far less to keep the building heated than you would for the deductible on your insurance claim. In most cases, that deductible may be $1,000, it may be $2,500, it may be $5,000, whatever it is, it's more than a water bill or a heat bill. So we want to make sure that keep at least basic heat on the building. We'll talk a little bit more too about places that you want to make sure are heated. But if nobody's going to be in the building, for example, that parsonage was unoccupied, or even the church, if you know nobody's going to be in the building all week, it may be useful to actually shut the water off during the freeze, or at least partially drain the water system. The one caveat we do make is make sure you shut down the water heater or boiler before you do that, because we don't want those operating without water in them. But it may be cost effective to actually drain the pipes if you can't heat them. Less chance of damage that way. Want to make sure there's a procedure for periodic inspections, and that means somebody checking on the building on a regular basis. We don't want it to go days and weeks without anybody checking on the building, particularly when it's extremely cold. And always understanding that that's only possible if it's safe to do that. One of the challenges we had a couple of years ago, we had several places in the country where it literally was not safe to get to the building because of the extreme weather conditions, ice buildup on the roads and things like that. But if possible, make sure somebody's checking on the building on a regular basis. All part of your plan. And then a response plan. If damage occurs, know who you're going to call, what the steps are to start that remediation process. So, preparation procedures. Before the winter weather even starts, you want to start winterizing the building. Even if it's a place that doesn't typically see extreme cold, we have seen some shifts in where we see cold weather, just like we've seen shifts in where we see hurricanes. Folks in Western North Carolina were anticipating a hurricane blowing through, but it's hit them pretty hard. Same way, places in Houston, Atlanta, Dallas, some of the places we saw were some of the most claims from freezing weather. Even in Louisiana, where we wouldn't typically see it. Starting to see that more often. So anywhere you've got pipes exposed, make sure they're insulated, covered, heated if possible. Make sure that we get that cold air away from the pipes anywhere we can. Look for air leaks, seal with a caulk, and keep the cold air out, because we want to make sure we don't. Part of the heating process is keeping that heat in the building. If we've got gaps around windows and things like that, we're not using that heat effectively. It's going to end up a whole lot colder in there. Insulating outside walls and unheated areas is especially important. We've got exterior utility closets, sprinkler riser rooms, things like that may not typically be heated. This would be a good chance to go ahead and keep those heated so that we don't have frozen pipes in those areas. That includes places like attics, basements, utility rooms, things like that we don't normally travel in, but can easily become very cold if we keep them insulated or heated. Disconnect garden hoses, drain your irrigation sprinklers. We don't want to see things like this where we've got, water all over the hose beds. That just builds up pressure in the system if it freezes there and ends up, that pressure backs up into the plumbing inside and will actually burst a pipe in the building. We get it frozen on the outside like that. All things we do ahead of the cold weather. When we know the cold weather's coming, and we typically get at least some warning, things to do. Again, we're talking about keeping that building heated at least 50 degrees. We don't want to get too cold in the building because that's what creates the problem. Where we've got plumbing in kitchen cabinets, under the sink in the bathrooms, places like that, want to make sure cabinets are left open so we get warmth in there. Where you've got pipes running through the ceiling, go ahead and open up that attic hatch when nobody's around. Let the heat up into that attic so that it stays warmer up there. We'll talk about if you've got drop ceilings in some areas and you've got pipes running through them, this would be a perfect time to go ahead and pop a couple of ceiling tiles up, let some of that warm air up into that area where we've got pipes exposed. Turn on faucets to a slow drip or a trickle. Moving water freezes a whole lot slower than stagnant water. You want to keep the water moving a little bit. That keeps it from freezing as quickly. And again, have someone check the building at least daily. There are leaks. Is the heat still on? All those things, making sure that the conditions stay safe. We know most churches in this day and age may not have fire sprinklers, but there are a number that do, and they are a much bigger complication. If you've got fire sprinklers, the challenge here is that fire sprinklers, by design, move a significant amount of water in a short amount of time. That's what they're designed to do. So we get a pipe break there. Instead of a gallon or two an hour that you might get out of a regular water line under a sink, or even a gallon a minute in some cases, some of these fire sprinkler pipes are designed to deliver as much as 500 gallons a minute, meaning that it fills up very quickly and a lot of water flowing, causing a lot of damage. So this is a key area. If you have fire sprinklers, make sure they're protected against freezing. That might mean that you need to have backup sources of heat. Make sure valves are insulated. If you have a dry sprinkler system, there's an air compressor in that needs to stay running. It needs to stay reducing condensation in the pipe. Otherwise, you'll build up condensation in the pipe, and that'll cause freezing as well. All things to consider. Again, we're making sure we're inspecting them for wet fire sprinkler systems, meaning that they have water in them at all times, and many sprinkler systems do. You want to add a little bit of antifreeze to that, and your sprinkler maintenance company can help you with that. Make sure that we've got drained any places where the water is sitting stagnant, checking for condensation, leaks. We want to make sure that water is staying in the pipes and not out in your building. And again, there's another place, those fire sprinklers are running through the ceiling of your building. So it's a great thought to go ahead and open up attic hatches, drop ceiling tiles. We want warm air circulating around those pipes to keep them from freezing. Make sure that the alarm system attached to your fire sprinkler system is operational and functional, because that's going to alert you if for some reason water starts flowing. It's going to alert your alarm company. It's then going to notify appropriate responders. Make sure we get that shut down quickly, because ultimately that's what'll burn that water through very quickly. You'll end up with water everywhere. Make sure that maintenance personnel and others responsible know where to shut that water off, even on the fire sprinkler side, so that you can get that shut down. And again, if those sprinklers are not operational, we don't recommend having people in the building. That represents a hazard, but we want to make sure that we can shut those sprinklers down if we need to. If the pipe freezes, hope it never does, but if you come across a frozen pipe, there are some things you can do to minimize the risk and potentially stop it before it becomes an actual burst pipe. Go ahead and keep that faucet open, because when it thaws, that water needs someplace to go. So we want to make sure that that faucet stays open, so when it begins to melt, that water flows through there and it dumps out in a safe place, not in the middle of your pipe run somewhere. Want to warm up the pipe to start thawing it. We want to do it in a safe manner. We recommend an electric heating pad, a hair dryer, a portable space heater. Those are all safe measures. What we don't want to do is get out a blowtorch, propane heater, things like that, and even open flame, because now we've introduced the risk of fire to the equation, which doesn't help. So it can also, if we heat it too quickly, it can actually create steam in the pipe, and then that builds up even more pressure and creates more problems. And then necessary to go ahead and contract the licensed plumbing contractor to help you with repairs if you've got any issues there. We want to make sure those repairs are done correctly. We don't want issues from that. And again, as you're heating that, remember, we're doing it slowly and carefully. We don't want to create another issue by heating things up too quickly. So if the pipe cracks or bursts, we want to shut off the water as quickly as possible, because ultimately the bulk of the claim comes from removing water. That's the key to this whole equation. We remove the water as quickly as possible. That usually means a series of things like opening doors, let the water out, push as much out with brooms and squeegees as you can. If you've got a shop vac, go ahead and start sucking that water out. Your carpet cleaning company typically has the equipment to start pumping water out. They may be helpful as well. And then we want to get professionals in to actually start bringing the humidity down, because that water buildup in there raises the humidity in the building. And the bigger risk long-term is the longer that water sits in there, the more likelihood you are to build up mold and other issues. So, and it's going to be a lengthy and kind of messy and difficult process, unfortunately, to get it cleaned up in most cases. So be prepared for that. You may be out of your building for a little while. Here's a picture here of, you've got several fans. In this building, they ended up having to tear out the carpet, what carpet you see there. So, one of the things we do for GuideOne customers have access to, excuse me, a relationship that GuideOne has with ServiceMaster. ServiceMaster is a nationwide provider of disaster recovery solutions. They can get out quickly, start pumping that water out, tear out carpet, tear out drywall, things like that, that'll get the remediation happening quickly. Because of the relationship Guide has with ServiceMaster, we can get you to the top of their priority list to get out there quickly, and also negotiated pricing that's already set up, so get that set up. So all things that we can do quickly for you. That's the bulk of what we wanted to cover for you today. That kind of gets started, but all important things. And again, we'll distribute these slides to you, including some links to some other materials as well. But wanted to open it up for questions as well. Make sure people have a chance to ask questions. We'll provide answers where we can.
Thanks, Brian. Question about automatic leak detecting systems. Do you recommend those, and where should they be installed, and how many should be installed?
Absolutely. And they are very helpful and can reduce the risk of issues here in that you can catch the leak quickly. The number to install varies a little bit based on your facility. We typically recommend installing them in places like utility rooms, next to sump pumps, near a boiler, anywhere you have a large collection of water that you have potential for a pipe burst, under a sink in the kitchen, places like that, where perhaps even in a restroom, depending on how your facility is laid out. But for sure, places like near the boiler or water heater, in a utility room where you've got water mains, particularly if they're exposed to temperature. And many of the sensors will tell you not only if there's water present, because they ultimately sense the moisture and that triggers it. Many of them will also give you a temperature warning as well. If that area drops below a certain preset temperature, it'll alert and tell you that it's now been exposed to the cold weather. For example, in that exposed utility closet on the outside that's got pipes running through it, it would tell you that it's now dropped close to freezing and that you need to be alert to that. So those are tools that can be used. And then make sure you have a response plan for when that goes off. Because ultimately, it's going to send a message to someone. You decide who that someone is and make sure they have the resources needed to get in and shut the water off and get things fixed.
Can they notify multiple people?
Absolutely. We recommend that, actually, because ultimately, the one person that you set up to notify is probably the one who won't be near their phone or unavailable for some reason. So we always recommend having multiple people in that chain to make sure that getting multiple people notified issue.
And I understand that there are some systems now that are a little bit more expensive and may require professional installation, but some of them will actually shut the water off for you before anybody can get there.
Absolutely. There are systems like that. And like we mentioned, they do require a little bit more work to install because they're actually going to you actually have a plumber install them typically because you've actually got to put them in line with the pipe. And what happens is it senses the moisture and then actually automatically closes the valve for you if it senses and triggers like that. So yeah, it's not a do-it-yourself project and they are a little more expensive, but it will effectively shut off the water if it's installed correctly.
Terrific. Yeah. And you had mentioned that, I don't know if you mentioned it or not, but on your slide also, your contract with your national service provider provides priority access. And I would imagine in a widespread event, that could be pretty significant.
It certainly can. And we've seen it recently in things like hurricanes, but in frozen pipe situations as well. When we have, when the weather gets really cold, it's not just going to be you that's exposed to cold pipes. It's your neighbors, houses, residences in the area, businesses in the area, and they're all contacting that same vendor looking for services. Because of the relationship GuideOne has with them, we can get you to the top of their list to get somebody out there as quickly as possible.
Great. Mm-hmm. Jeff D., do you have anything to add?
I don't, Brian. I really appreciate this. I think that the conversation of burst pipes and water damage and the impact it can have on your insurance premiums and your program is really significant. As we work with churches all throughout the country, when carriers see that you've had water damage, it becomes really challenging. And so that bit of maintenance or preemptive risk management that you can do, I think is going to have a huge value long-term for these congregations to be able to be insurable and to find market costs, market pricing, as we've seen throughout the marketplace. It's very, very challenging. So they're really timely and very important for churches to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know from GuideOne perspective, one of the things we do, if we do come out and do a loss control survey, one of the things we'll typically ask is, do you have a frozen pipe plan? Do you look through this? Because it's one of the things we're looking for is help mitigate those losses. Yeah. Ultimately, those losses add up and it will impact your premium before too much longer.
And if you have had a leak or frozen pipe claim in the past, it's going to show up on your loss run. So it's a good idea to take steps to prevent it and also to let your agent know that you've done that so the carrier knows that you've taken steps to prevent a reoccurrence.
Absolutely.
Yep. Absolutely.
Jeff, are you seeing carriers raise deductibles in some cases for frozen pipes and leaks?
Absolutely. What we're seeing from a carrier standpoint is they are preemptively protecting themselves by adding not just higher normal deductibles, but specific water damage deductibles, both from a flat dollar and even some carriers are going to a percentage water damage deductible similar to a wind and hail. So you're talking about some carriers are putting 1%, 2% deductibles on water damage. So if you've got a $5 million building and you have a 2% water damage, it's $100,000 water damage deductible. It's becoming very, very common to see these types of things now. And sublimits where they're saying, you know what, we'll give you coverage, we'll keep the deductible low, but the most we'll give you is $25,000 or $100,000 because the frequency is so significant. And as Brian mentioned, it does not take a lot for the damage to be in the multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars.
$110,000 average, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty significant. It may not make the 6 o'clock news, but if it happens to you, it can be not just expensive, but very disruptive because it takes away worship space or working space for your ministry.
Yeah.
So, Brian and Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. I don't see any more questions in the chat. This has been really valuable information, and I look forward to being able to share this with a lot of folks in recording and in sharing slides. And thank you all for joining us today. We're really glad that you could make it, and we hope that you can join us again when we do another webinar. Brian and Jeff, thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.